Good day. Welcome to Fairfield County Talk Radio. Produced by Sharc Creative, FairfieldCountyTalkRadio.com. I'm John Marino, and we are made possible by Tough Lawn Service, Fairfield County Tick Control, also by Ecosystems Irrigation and Lighting, Gutter Brothers Home Services, Santa Fuel, New England Motor Oil, MDM Sanitation, Good Morning Wilton, Earthscapes, Landscapes Management and Development, Apollo X Pest Control, the Dagny's Real Estate, and the Wilton Chamber of Commerce. Here on What's Happening in Fairfield County, we are joined by State Senator Ryan Fazio. Ryan Fazio represents the 36th State Senatorial District here, and he was elected to office last November. Ryan Fazio, welcome back to Fairfield County Talk Radio. Your first 8 months in office, well, you were elected 8 months ago and sworn in, I guess, in January, so your first 6 months in office. How has that shaped up to you? The pros, the cons, what has been as good as or even better than you thought would be, and what has been maybe not so good as expected?
Good to be with you, John. I think this is the first time I've been back with you since I have been in office.
Right.
I got elected in a special election in August of 2021. Was sworn in a week after that. But this was my first full year we're coming up on in office. And as you say, it's given me a moment for reflection, finishing the session and now starting my re-election campaign for November 8th of 2022. This interim period has given me some time for reflection on that first term in office. And a lot of it was about as I expected. Obviously, being a Republican, I am in the minority in the General Assembly in Connecticut with a Democratic governor as well. And there were opportunities to work across the aisle, which I valued, and I appreciated some of the camaraderie within the General Assembly. There's also things that I had fundamental disagreements with the majority party about, especially related to issues of public safety and the economy, personal freedom, and so on. So the people up there are very friendly, actually. That was one of the pleasant surprises, but one of the unpleasant surprises was that the legislative process is even less thorough than you might imagine. So people are in the General Assembly, especially in the minority party, are getting dozens of bills thrown at them every day that they're not sure which ones are coming. And we're rushing to read them, but no one is really reading all of the legislation that comes up for a vote. So that's probably the less pleasant surprise that came to
But
me.
isn't that why you have a staff, so maybe they can go through it and they can point out certain things to you?
That is correct. And in part-time legislatures, which Connecticut is and New York is not, they're known to be more staff-heavy operations, more dependent on the expertise and the experience of staff. And the staff is very good. The research staff is very good. But I prefer to read the bills myself. It becomes difficult if you're in the minority, you don't know what bills are coming, and then you get 20 bills thrown at you a day, and they're probably on average 10 pages. It becomes very difficult to read in a few hours bills that are coming before you. So you're in your caucus room with your mates, and you're trying to divide and conquer, reading this, reading that, prioritizing the ones based on the summary that you think are the most problematic.
Mm-hmm. If you spent all of your time reading bills, I guess you wouldn't have time for anything else to actually legislate, right?
Yes, you have to try to manage the time during session, which normally is January through May or June, well. And it definitely becomes a deluge of legislation. Again, a lot of which is bad, quite frankly. What the public might fear happens under the Golden Dome in Hartford is exactly what's happening. Very, I think, careless legislation frequently being passed without deep consideration, without a deep connection to reality, but perhaps with a pleasant headline, constantly getting passed, and I think leading Connecticut to where it is today, and in economic malaise, making it very difficult for middle-class families to get by.
What bills have you put together so far, and what might be on the horizon from you?
Well, I passed one bill that I wrote and introduced on mental health and specifically trying to study the effects of cell phones and other things in schools on student mental health, which has become especially important over the last 10 years as we've seen rates of self-harm, depression, and anxiety among adolescents in particular skyrocket, and especially so in light of the pandemic, where we saw rates of mental health problems accelerate. And so we passed a bill that was incorporated into a larger omnibus bill, SB2, to study and then recommend specific policies to address mental health problems that adolescents are facing in Connecticut schools, especially due to cell phones and social media, which the connection between mental health problems and overuse of social media and cell phones, smartphones, being very, very strong and I think widely accepted in social psychology and social science generally. So one social psychologist who I consulted in writing this bill, Jonathan Haidt, said that our study could be a first in the nation type study and treatment of these issues. So hopefully Connecticut can be a leader in trying to ameliorate the mental health problems that adolescents are facing. I introduced over 30 bills. That's the one that got passed. And I co-sponsored some others that did get passed that were bipartisan. And we can really go down in more detail into what the proposals were. But most of the bills that I introduced, the 30, were focused on the economy, tax relief, and improving regulations, reducing red tape in order to reduce the cost of living for families and to make it easier on small businesses to thrive.
You represent the 36th State Senate District, which is Greenwich and parts of Stamford and New Canaan, that area, one of the more affluent, one of the most affluent areas in the country. We think in general that people who live in areas like this and have the access and the means to different things and ways of life that most people don't have or suffer from mental health issues. What's the look at that you have? How do you look at that?
Maybe as a student of Russian literature in particular, I have a firm belief that we all have problems. And so the people who live in some of the biggest houses have problems, and the people who live in some of the smallest apartments might be even happier or feel greater life satisfaction for whatever reason than some of the people in the biggest houses. I'm lucky to represent a very diverse community. It is on average, it certainly has a higher average income than maybe every Senate district or almost every Senate district in Connecticut. And so there's a lot of good fortune here, but there's a lot of diversity here, economic diversity. I have working class neighborhoods in Southwestern Greenwich in particular. That's where I went to middle school. We have 3 middle schools in Greenwich. One's a Title I middle school, meaning it has more than 40% of the student population on free and reduced lunch. That's Western Middle School. We have a lot of pride. That's my alma mater, so I have a lot of pride in it. Stanford's obviously a very diverse city with a lot of economic need too. So it's a growing city, unlike most Connecticut cities, which are shrinking. So that's fortunate. But obviously, like any other city, it has a lot of diversity, a large immigrant population, a large population of people under the poverty line. And so our goal is, no matter what, to create income growth, create prosperity, create opportunity, especially for the people in our district and around the state who are suffering. And then obviously on top of that, the 36th district, Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan, provide a disproportionate amount of the tax revenue for the rest of the state. So making sure that we have prosperity and a high tide in our district and beyond is important to supporting government and social services for the rest of the state.
COVID knows no racial, gender, economic, or ethnic bounds and seems to be an equal opportunity destroyer. It's back. It's wave number 5 around the region. How much is COVID affecting life in your district now?
I would say very little. I think people understand that they have tools available to them to manage the risks, especially if they have underlying health conditions or are older. Whether that's vaccines and boosters or social distancing, choosing to avoid crowds and indoor crowds in particular, or N95 masks. But Like me, I think most people understand that we have to get on with life, that government mandates certainly and infringements on our freedom are not acceptable 2 years after, or 2.25 years after the beginning of the pandemic, that people have to avail themselves of the tools and the discretion necessary to protect themselves and their family as they see fit. But this is a time for, I think, individual empowerment, individual responsibility, and getting back to normal.
Do you ever worry that maybe monkeypox could be the next COVID, whether it really is or not, and that those who are in power, and there is a party that seems to be in a lot of trouble upcoming in November, it's not the Republican Party around the area or around the country, and we hear talk from time to time, well, they're going to institute more COVID lockdowns as we get close to November, or maybe another pandemic will hit. Wink, wink. And now we talk monkeypox, and it seems to be growing, not greatly, but at least the thought and worry seems to be out there.
I don't know very much about monkeypox, so I don't want to. I don't want to opine as if I am an authority on it or have done as much research on it as, say, COVID. It seems to be at a low level. It seems like people should not be alarmed. Obviously, it should be tracked. I think I'm under the impression that well, first of all, the smallpox vaccine seems to be a valid treatment or prevention measure for monkeypox. It also seems to be maybe a frequently sexually transmitted. But beyond that, I can't seem to opine. Again, people should be wary. They should avail themselves of any tools they think are necessary to protect themselves. But centralized mandates and infringements on people's freedom, I don't think worked very well during the pandemic, and I don't think will work well going forward.
How did the economy get to where it is in such a short period of time, in less than 18 months, basically? Inflation, gas prices, food prices, baby formula shortage, supply shortages, and so much more that's going on. How did we get here, and how do we get out of it?
Great question, very important question, probably the number one question on the minds of people across our country, certainly in your and my area where it's very expensive to live and raise a family. There are certainly exogenous factors that have made things more difficult economically and contributed to inflation. Exogenous, rather, of government decision in this country. The war in Eastern Europe, the aftermath of the pandemic, where people chose to resign themselves from the workforce or avoid work due to safety reasons. But to a very large degree, the inflation that we're facing across this country is the result of bad government policy. You and I have talked about some of the articles I've written for the New York Post over the past few years. One I wrote in January or February of 2021, the beginning of the Biden administration, was a plea for the president and the Senate not to pass into law a $2 trillion deficit finance stimulus package at the beginning of 2021 when the economy was already growing. And I think my direct quote from that article was that this is one of the least justifiable large bills to come before Congress and pass the House of Representatives in recent history of this country. And that's borne out to be correct assessment, a correct warning, that the deficit spending has contributed to the inflation, which has now reached a 40-year high. And then certainly in the aftermath of COVID, as we talked about before, excessive lockdowns, especially in places like California and New York, reduced work, reduced economic growth and productivity, and has led on, 2 years from the onset of the pandemic, has led to major supply shortages and inflation as well. So to a large degree, the inflation that we're facing now was predictable and was a consequence of bad government policy, high degrees of centralization in our federal government and state governments, and high degrees of deficit spending that not only were inflationary in the form of pumping the prime, increasing aggregate demand, but also in disincenting people from working or re-entering the workforce, which again creates some more supply shortages. I mean, it's not acceptable to me that the richest, most powerful country in the world should see shortages of basic goods like baby formula or feminine products. The baby formula market in particular is, I think, the instability of it, the fragility of it is a consequence, again, of bad government policy at the federal level. Over 50% of all baby formula purchases in the country are through a federal program in, I think, the United States Department of Agriculture, the WICC program. And so that creates instability and fragility and excessive concentration in the baby formula market, which has since led to shortages. So this is an altogether unacceptable situation. When I talk to voters in my area, they understand that the richest, most powerful country in the world should not be seeing shortages of basic goods and services. It should not have to, the people of this country should not have to experience 40-year high inflation, which has also meant a 40-year, the fastest decline in real wages for workers in 40 years in this country. This is, to a large degree, the responsibility and the failure of bad government policy. So now we need to change the direction at the state level and at the federal level.
So why don't those in power already change course when they see what they're doing is not working and this is not what people want?
Well, a few people do. I mean, Joe Manchin, who voted for the stimulus package that I warned against in the New York Post, he and Kyrsten Sinema, the two moderate Democrats in the U.S. Senate, demurred at the idea of spending trillions more in a Build Back Better plan, which would have increased the deficit in the in-years and increased inflation for that reason too. And recently, it seems like he's demurring at the idea of more federal spending as well and tax increases in a package that's currently being negotiated. So some people seem to be able to learn from their mistakes, which is admirable, especially in government where you're not frequently rewarded for admitting your mistakes. But we all make mistakes. We're all human and we're dealing with complex problems. But I think that, frankly, I think that the Democratic Party, especially in the Northeast, especially in my region, has become very ideological and less pragmatic over time. And that's led to the ballooning of tax burdens and regulatory burdens, making it harder on small businesses and families. Government and the people who are currently in power in government, say in my state, always seem to think that government can do best and knows best, and that bureaucracy, hyper-bureaucratization can make things better. I think that the current situation we're facing tells the exact opposite story, that excessive red tape, excessive government regulation and taxation are really hurting middle class and working class people in particular. This inflation is really hurting working class people a lot more than, say, the rich people in my district. And so it really requires that people in power reflect on their record in office. If you want responsibility, you should take responsibility. And if you don't, then the voters are going to have to take recourse at the ballot box.
Ryan Fazio, State Senator, 36th District here in Fairfield County Talk Radio. I'm John Marino. What's happening in Fairfield County here? And what's happening around Connecticut? Maybe a tie-in here with out in Windsor Locks at Bradley Airport. How have operations maybe been affected there with what's happening with the airlines around the country and around the world too? How does that tie into what goes on around the state of Connecticut, and how does it trickle down to this county economically?
Well, I'm not an expert on the airline industry, and my understanding is that there have been some shortages, first of all, on the labor side, which are creating a lot more delays, cancellations, and a lot of lost baggage. I have a bunch of friends who seem to, on international and domestic flights, are losing their baggage and not getting it back for weeks on end. Again, these are disruptions that should not be acceptable to people in the richest and most powerful country in the world. It shouldn't be accepted as normal. It seems more Soviet than anything else. Obviously, energy prices are significantly increasing the cost of airfare as well, because that's a large portion of the fare that you pay for your airline ticket. So energy prices are obviously a crisis, and ensuring that we have energy independence for the sake of our national security, but especially the prosperity and well-being of middle class and working class people who a larger share of whose budget is expended on energy and utilities. That's very important. So those are the things I understand are happening in the airline industry. I haven't flown in 2 months for work, so that's probably my good fortune. But it's certainly a problem facing the country as a whole.
Mm-hmm. You talk about a third world country, especially when it comes to crime and guns and things like that, and it seems like you can't walk out your front door sometimes. How did we get this way when it comes to how dangerous, and I hate to use that word, but it's true in a lot of areas, it is dangerous to walk the streets at 10 o'clock in the morning because you don't know if you might get shot. And how do we maybe shut down the iron pipeline of guns to places like parts of Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport, Hartford, Waterbury, New Britain, Danbury? I mean, this is a problem in Connecticut, too.
It absolutely is. And I've been talking about it for a couple of years. We've probably talked about it, too. But over the last 2 years in three of Connecticut's major cities that have available data for 2021, the homicide rate increased over 80% in Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford. That's really staggering and totally unacceptable, especially because New England is known for a high degree of social capital. It's a relatively safe region of the country. And even in 2020, when there was an enormous national increase in killings and shootings and homicides, the increase was not nearly as great in New England. I think Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine saw basically no increase in homicides altogether. But Connecticut, it was higher than the national average, which is really shocking because, again, such a high degree of social capital. For generations, it was one of the safest places in the country. But something's changed in the past 2 years. And you can't have the conversation about violence and shootings and increased killings without discussing the nationwide protests led by progressives in the media and progressives in government, labeling policing as systemically biased or systemically unjust, and then taking government action in accordance with that worldview. Including the 2020 police overhaul, the police bill that was passed in Connecticut that tied the hands of police, that imposed new liabilities on police, and took away important proactive policing tools that were important to taking illegal guns off the streets. Something called consent searches, again, a proactive policing tool that totally is within bounds in terms of civil liberties, was responsible for taking hundreds of illegal guns off the street over many years, according to some police departments in Connecticut. The ultimate enforcement mechanism for ensuring that people who are clear and present danger, or people who are criminals who should not have guns in their possession, is the police. And so if we do not have smart, proactive policing policies in place and a culture that accepts the legitimacy of policing, then stopping the scourge of rising shootings and homicides, which have befallen some of our most vulnerable neighborhoods over the past 2 years, is impossible. So again, this is a very important issue. It's afflicting some of our poorest residents and most vulnerable residents, especially young men, especially young Black men. And if we do not get it under control, then the violence will only continue to get worse.
Does Connecticut have any kind of a stand your ground law that you know of, anything on the books? For example, how do we get a situation where all of this leading to, let's say, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg letting someone who stabs someone who's under attack, and the guy who was under attack in a Manhattan bodega wound up killing another man because he attacked him, and yet that guy's girlfriend, we have her on video threatening the store worker to begin with and then stabbing him while he's defending himself, and the situation where her boyfriend wound up dead.
Yeah, Alvin Bragg, another left-wing prosecutor, like many across the country, who seems to be totally unwilling to enforce the law and protect law-abiding citizens who are under threat from rising crime. He seems to be more on the side of crime than on the side of peace. And certainly for peace to proliferate, we need to entitle people to the right to self-defense. And that bodega owner, I think we've now, most of us are now familiar with that sad saga. He was being attacked and he was defending himself. He's a hardworking, law-abiding citizen. And like many of these bodega owners, many of them of whom are immigrants to this country and work really hard, break their backs in order to provide for themselves and their families and try to achieve a piece of the American dream. A lot of them are under attack from rising crime, people stealing, people attacking them, people killing people in the neighborhoods and making it impossible to do business. And now people like Alvin Bragg saying, not only are we not going to enforce the law in order to defend the public, but we're actually going to persecute people who are defending themselves from violent attacks. That's totally unacceptable. I mean, I really hope that the voters of New York are paying attention and that they take recourse, because the destruction and violence that have befallen cities with left-wing prosecutors like Alvin Bragg, like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, like the prosecutors in Chicago and Garth Cohn in Los Angeles and other cities. These are great American cities. They're fantastic places, and they're being hollowed out by rising crime. And it's a totally discretion. It's totally because of the discretion of people in power in those cities. It does not have to be that way. And so hopefully voters will rise up and be it probably especially Democrat voters in primaries, as they did to their credit in San Francisco this year, and take out those prosecutors and elect people in their place who will actually enforce the law and protect law-abiding citizens.
Couple of recent Supreme Court rulings, and these have generated lots of discussion, to put it mildly, around the country on guns and abortion. First, let's tie it into what we're talking about here. Guns and how we get guns out of the hands of those who should not have them. And I think this needs to be extended to how do we get guns off the streets? And that iron pipeline, to me, comes back again.
Yes, so the gun case strikes me as somewhat narrow. You might know better than me because you are a New York resident, probably pay closer attention, because the actual case in question concerned a New York law, which is similar to, but not that similar to, a Connecticut law. And basically the idea is that in order to get a carry permit, that the burden of proof for good character or deservingness of the permit is on the citizen rather than on the government to show why the citizen should not have a right to that permit. In Connecticut, the burden of proof is not as strong on the individual. So it's not clear to me whether the law in Connecticut runs crosswise the Supreme Court ruling. Certainly, obviously, the one in New York does. I mean, I think there is a way of keeping guns out of the hands of people who should not have them, criminals and people who are severely disturbed, while also protecting the Second Amendment rights and the Fifth Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, which is also important to self-defense. So I think there's a smart balance that states should be able to achieve, even center-left states like Connecticut. So hopefully we can do that and protect people in the process. And then the other case, obviously, is probably more significant, the Dobbs ruling that reversed Roe v. Wade. And so state governments are going to have to make decisions about how they want to regulate abortion. And states like Connecticut and New York, I don't think are up for debate. I think abortion will remain legal whether we have a Democrat or Republican governor in Connecticut or elected in New York, or a Democrat or Republican legislature. I and our Senate Minority Leader and our Republican candidate for governor have all said that abortion is going to remain legal regardless of which party is in power. And so then the question becomes, how are we going to provide guardrails and safety measures around that industry as well? I think parental notification laws are totally reasonable in order to protect young girls. I think limits on late-term abortions are totally reasonable and supported by the vast majority of voters in either party. So again, just like the guns issue, I think in light blue states that we're going to come to common sense, pragmatic solutions that make things better. But largely the underlying laws are not going to change regardless of whether Republicans or Democrats are in power. So I think that underlying situation, especially about whether abortion remains illegal, it will in Connecticut.
Do you think maybe the Supreme Court punted to some extent on both rulings? And to me, here's how. On the guns ruling, yes, New York, you can open carry, but New York, you can also create all of these totally super stringent laws where you can't carry a gun here and you can't carry here and you can't carry here and you can't carry there. And oh, by the way, we're going to make it so tough for you to carry anyway that you're going to have to go through so much training and testing. You're going to get to a point in where you say, the heck with this, I don't need that gun. Or with abortion, okay, states, you pick it up, rule as you wish, as you determine. And yet Brett Kavanaugh says, but if you live in one state where abortion gets banned and you want to go to another state, you want to go to New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, et cetera, where you can go get an abortion legally. Well, if I try to stop you, then I'm violating the interstate commerce statute. So to me, that's like they try to give something to everybody. And by doing that, you can't, you get things like protests outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house.
Yes, I'm under no illusion that these issues are simple at the constitutional level, and I have no desire to be a judge, so I don't know that I could intelligently remark too much on any of those cases. But certainly, gun regulation is very complicated, especially in places like New York and Connecticut, which have dozens of gun laws. I think in Connecticut we have an excess of 60 criminal gun laws, and so determining what exactly is reasonable or effective is a very difficult task. And going back to the interstate question on abortion, I think the Constitution is pretty clear in Article 4, the full faith and credit clause, that states cannot infringe upon the rights of other states to democratically determine their own laws within the bounds of the Constitution. So, again, I don't think that someone in Pennsylvania can dictate what should be the law or sue someone for doing things that are legal in Connecticut. So I think between the interstate commerce clause and the full faith and credit clause, I think that provides some clarity and guardrails on what one state could attempt to do to another.
November elections, less than 4 months away. The prospects for your party, the Republican Party, locally here in Fairfield County and around the state of Connecticut, too.
I think they're very positive. Again, people are facing a historic crisis of inflation and cost of living that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And most people now alive have not seen in their lifetime since the early 1980s. And that's not acceptable to people. And even though it's mostly the consequence of federal mistakes, it's the consequence of specifically high tax, high spend policies that have made Connecticut, for instance, unaffordable and difficult to do business in and difficult to raise family in for many, many years before this. So I think voters understand that. I think they're focused on issues like that, where the actual policy is up in the air and up for debate in the state of Connecticut, and where there is a clear alternative to make things better. That's exactly what I'm hearing from voters when I talk to them every day, which I am talking to them every day. And so I think that provides an enormous opportunity for Republicans in southwestern Connecticut and across Connecticut to provide a positive alternative for regular middle-class families that love their community, that love their state because it's such a wonderful place, but also understand that we can do far better with a change in leadership and a change in direction. And that's what this entire election in Connecticut and in many other states is going to be about. We are very, very lucky to live in such a wonderful place. I am in such a wonderful place, in such a wonderful state, in such a wonderful country. We should not settle for mediocrity. We should not settle for the second best. We can do far better. And so this election will be all about offering a better alternative. And I think people will accept that.
Ryan Fazio, State Senator, 36th District here in Fairfield County, representing the Greenwich area, parts of Stamford and New Canaan, too. We thank you for joining us again here on Fairfield County Talk Radio, and let's talk soon.
Thanks a lot, John. Have a great day.
All right. Always good to talk to you, Ryan Fazio, here in Fairfield County Talk Radio, fairfieldcountytalkradio.com. I'm John Marino. This is What's Happening in Fairfield County, and we are produced by Sharc Creative, made possible by Tough Lawn Lawn Service, by Fairfield County Tick Control, also by Echo Systems, Irrigation and Lighting, and Gutter Brothers, Home Services, Santa Fuel, New England Motor Oil, MDM Sanitation, Good Morning Wilton, Earthscapes, Landscape Management and Development, by Apollo X Pest Control, Dagny's Real Estate, and the Wilton Chamber of Commerce. Catch all of our Fairfield, Westchester, Rockland, Dutchess, Orange, and Putnam County radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.